Hi, West Island. It's Rhonda Masad from West Island Blog, and we are here today with Conservative Party hopeful Kevin O'Leary. Hi, how are you?
Great to be here, thank you.
You anxious to take your spot in May?
I am actually.
Okay, so let's get right down to it. You're living the dream. You're on TV, you're famous, you've got a great show, you're making some money. Why do you want to do this?
That's a great question. I think discovering people's motivation is very important. Two reasons. I've been giving back lately. I've been very lucky in Canada, and one of the ways I do that, besides charity, is to teach. I teach graduating cohorts of engineers. And something is really disturbing me in the last 2 years. Generally, these are evening classes, sometimes as many as 650 people there. And the reason I teach engineering graduating cohorts is about a third of the class is going to be an entrepreneur. And they want to pursue that lifestyle. And I like to teach around the commitment that's going to be, explaining to them not the successes I've had, but the failures I had, so I'm teaching them not to make the same mistake. But invariably when I teach in Canada, at McGill, at U of T, at Calgary, UBC, the class usually go out for a beer after the class at 6 to 9 at night. So now we're out of the pub at 10. They say to me, Kevin, great class, thank you for coming, but what I really want from you is your Rolodex. I'd like to meet the people at Apple, at Uber. I'd like to meet the Facebook guys. I know you work with all these people. I'd like to start my company in the United States. And I say, why? Why would you want to do that? Think of the robotics class at Waterloo or electrical engineer at McGill. Not some of them, all of them want to go to the States. And I say, why? They say, well, I don't want to be paid in dollarettes. I want to be paid in real dollars. I don't want to be taxed at 53.8%. I can't build a team in Canada. Help me get financed in the States, and I swear to you, when I sell my company, I'll buy a cottage in Canada, come back in the summer. That's really disturbing. There's something wrong there. The tone of the country has changed. Something has gone wrong.
But you did exactly that.
No, I started my company in the basement of 411 Shaw Street. That's where I started.
Shaw Street in?
Toronto.
Okay.
Yeah, in the basement. And for 10 years in the basement, there I was. But I'll
But
tell
then
you,
you moved.
yes, I moved because I started to acquire software companies all around the world.
Okay.
And I moved because the NDP took over. Bob Rae, who was left of a communist, took over Ontario, and I was unable to compete. And something similar is happening in Canada now, the same disaster. His name is Justin Trudeau, but that's not the reason. This is the reason. You can tie my entry into this race to within hours of the document that Trudeau put out that said he's going to run deficits in this country for 38 years in a row, leaving Canada $1.5 trillion in debt. That means my children, my 20-year-old son, my 24-year-old daughter, will be mired in debt for the rest of their lives. They're going to be paying interest to some person outside of Canada. They don't get the same health care. They don't get the same education. They don't get that for their children. Every Canadian will be $40,000 to $60,000 in debt when they're born. Why? Because Trudeau can't run an economy successfully because he's an incompetent person? Where is it written that we have to be so poorly managed as a country? I thought to myself, no chance in hell I'm going to let him do that. I'm going to get in this race. I'm going to win the leadership. I'm going to shine the light of transparency on him the next 2 years, make his life a living hell, and then I'm going to have an exorcism in 2019. I'm going to excise him out of Canada. All his policies that destroy the economy, I'm going to reverse it. This is a movement. This is a war against good versus evil, light versus darkness. That's the way I look at it. He is bad news.
All right, we have a question from Julian, who actually along that line, he is one of our viewers, and he wanted to know, he's studying at Concordia, and he would like to know how you're going to help the next generation and boost the economy in such a way that the next generation will have jobs.
So, the number, I'm not a politician. I'm not going to make 25 promises I never keep. That's the typical mode of these politicians. That's not what I do. I'm making one promise, 3% GDP growth. Everything works in Canada at 3% GDP growth. Now, it's a number, but it's an important one because all through my life, Canada would vary between 2.5% to 6% GDP growth. We'd go through recessions, we'd bounce back. The economy was always growing. I had 5 job offers when I graduated, 5. You don't get that anymore because the economy is collapsing as a result of Trudeau's policies. It's a disaster. So my best and most important task is to get a vibrant growth back in to every province so that when you're young and you're in your 20s and you graduate from either high school, college, university, or technical school, There's a job there waiting for you.
You hear that, guys?
That's the number one issue. That's the number one issue.
It is a big thing. Adults, children, everybody,
Yeah,
adolescents.
and if you're working, you'll get some wage inflation. We haven't had a job increase in pay for people in almost 7 years. The economy is flat and going down. When Trudeau came in, it was 1.5%. Then it was 1.1, then it was 1, then it was 0.9, now it's 0.7. It's crashing, it's slowing down, it's collapsing. It's his fault.
There's a lot of kerfuffle about supply management. What is your position?
You know, every country supports their agricultural base, including the United States, England, France, Switzerland. Everybody does this, particularly in dairy. We do the same. You have to protect it because this is always comes into negotiations on trade deals. In TPP, the one we were negotiating with U.S. and the Pacifics, this was already worked out with Harper over a long period of time to buy out the quotas. But the cost of buying out the quotas today is $30 billion. Nobody can afford that. If you're going to give that up, you're going to have to get something in return. So you have to protect it going into these negotiations, which are going to start in 2 weeks.
How do you protect it?
You have to negotiate getting something back in return. In other words, you don't just shut it down. You don't see any other country doing that to their farmers. Of course not, because there's too many jobs, and that's a basically important element to every economy. That's why it doesn't happen. You gotta negotiate it, that's what happens. And we already have an agreement with the farmers in TPP. They've already agreed to a 3%. We can use that as a ground basis to start again if and when the time comes, but it's not now.
Okay, let's switch gears a little bit. 26% of women are represented in the House. 50% of the population is represented by 26% in the House. Do you believe in gender quota systems, or how would you like to invite women more in?
First, let me state, if you look at my 40 portfolio companies in O'Leary Productions and all the private companies I invest in, not some of my returns, all of my returns come from the companies run by women. So I've had a very successful investment relationship with women for over a decade now. But when you talk about caucus and you talk about quotas, I heard this, from Trudeau over and over again, diversity, diversity, diversity. He never uttered the word competence. I want to support competence in caucus. There are many competent women, so I'm sure we're going to find very good ones, but it's competence that matters because managing a government is a team sport. You have to find great players if you're going to win. And that's what we have to do. The way Trudeau did it was a disaster.
Another gear switch. Donald Trump, you've been compared to him on numerous occasions, and there's two questions there. It's twofold. How do you feel about being compared to him, and how will you manage a certain anxiety coming from Canadian standpoint of the volatility of our southern neighbors?
Right. Well, let's start, with the comparison. There is a similarity, only that we both attained huge social media databases with the notoriety of business reality television. I on Shark Tank, he on The Apprentice. But that's where the similarities end. I'm half Lebanese, half Irish. If there was a wall around Canada, I wouldn't exist.
Half Lebanese, half British.
There you have it. So we are both of immigrants, and that's what Canada is. It's always going to be, in my view, an inclusive country. So we don't share the same values in that way that Trump does. Now, the volatility with these immigration policies is actually an opportunity for Canada because many companies now want to bring their engineers from places like Syria, Jordan, Iraq, Iran to Canada. And if they pass our immigration policies, great. There's an opportunity for us to bring some very high-paying jobs into the country along with their families, as we always have. I mean, that's what makes Canada great. But, I think you have to realize that it's very important that we negotiate with leverage against Trump and with him because he's our #1 trading partner. Wilbur Ross, Donald Trump, the team that's going to be renegotiating NAFTA. We're getting the letter next week to start that negotiation. It'll take years to solve this. We have lots of leverage, though. Canada's responsible for 9.5 million jobs in the U.S. Most Canadians don't know we're the #1 trading partner in 35 states. $2 billion a day goes back and forth across the border. And then ultimately, Canadians have to decide who would they rather have negotiating with Trump, Bambi ou moi?
Ou toi. Okay, question is, West Island is my viewership and traditionally liberal. How are you going to sway this type of population to conservative?
They have to make a decision about what they care about. Every person in Canada has the same goals, I believe. They want better for their children, they want better for their families, they want security, they want to know that government is well run. I think, and I like to say this often, Justin Trudeau will elect Kevin O'Leary. He just has to keep doing what he's doing. He's driving this economy into the ground. And all the promises he made to young liberals only 2 years ago with the sunny times, there's no sunny times for them. There's just a bare light bulb hanging in the basement of their parents' home where they live, in the basement because they can't get a job. They're not happy anymore. I'm going to go across the country to those young people who voted 80% for Trudeau and bring them back into the Conservative Party, because my version of the Conservative Party is I'm a conservative expansionist. You know, I'm Irish Catholic. If you believe in pro-life, I understand you. If you're like my daughter who's pro-choice, I understand you. But we're not going to regulate morality in the Conservative Party. We're going to grow the base dramatically, and including the people on the West Island who voted Liberal, I think they're going to give me a chance because I'm going to do a better job running the country.
Last question, we're running out of time. What was your last act of kindness?
My last act of kindness. I just celebrated last night my 27th anniversary with my wife, and she only asked me one thing: leave your cell phones at home. I have never done that in 27 years, but I did it last night.
Okay. So thank you very much. It was great
Thank you.
visiting with you. Thank you very much.
It's a good question.
Bye.